to the archive. Rachel Meyer of the Epoch Preservation Incorporated. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How do you say the name of my business?
Epoch
It's
Preservation.
Epic. So you know
Epic.
what I love about that is when we named the business, we had actually gone through a million names and they were all taken. And then we finally settled on EPOCH because we liked the meaning and immediately had an argument about how to say it. And then decided that's funny because everybody will do that. So it's Epic. But go
Epic.
ahead. You could call it Epoch if you want. That's very British.
Okay. Epoch Epic. Epic Preservation. Epoch.
Yeah.
I thought you were going with maybe like some kind of esoteric or stoic meaning, or there was like something about the graves that Epoch would have related to, but it's epic. Okay. And you did it specifically because you knew everybody was going to get it wrong, which I love it even more, though.
I mean, we like the idea that it means, a time and space, and that this was sort of we were in our 30s when we came up with the idea to start a business. And so, we had already done so many other things with our lives. And here we are finally finding like our calling and starting a new epic or epoch, so we kind of liked it in that way, you
Nice.
know, but also we like to get the question, how do you say your name? Like,
It makes it even better. All right. So this is a good start to the interview. All right. And you found that there was a calling into doing this. Why particularly did you do a calling into preserving and restoring and fixing graves?
You know, I was working in a lot of like small history museums. And when I was working in them, I didn't ever quite feel right in them. I always felt like I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be the person people were talking about, the discoverer of the history, more than the person who was interpreting what other people had discovered. I wanted to be outside. And I remember people would come in on the weekends and be like, oh, I'm doing this thing or that thing. And I'd be shut into a museum and be like, oh, I sure wish I was out there doing a thing. So, when I originally got into this, it was because I had found an abandoned cemetery. And I was thinking, so many people restore historic houses. I'm not saying there isn't a threat against historic houses, but there are a lot of people who are willing to work in historic house museums. But there's nobody really nobody at all in our area who is going to restore the graves of these people. And I was going into this neglected and abandoned cemetery, and I was recognizing all the names of the people whose museum I was working in. It was astounding, but their graves were in 1,000 different pieces. So to me, it felt like, because of my background in museum management and also, my background in community organizing, I couldn't imagine another person who could have done this. So I felt like, in that sense, it was a calling. Like I was made to save these places.
Awesome. Awesome. It's actually funny. I started this to preserve initially people that were 65 and older's stories. So that is cool. I can relate to that.
That's what you were doing?
Yeah. Yeah. There's this guy who's like he's like that cool 90-year-old Chick McDougal, and he's in when I was working at Exeter TV, the public TV station. He was in the brass band, and he had been in it his whole life. So he had like 70 something years of stories to tell, and or most of his life. And I'd found pictures going like all the way back to the 50s of him playing in that band, and like 2 weeks or 2 days, some short period of time right before I started it, he passed away. And I had this
Oh,
plan.
okay.
The whole reason I made the doc, I got it started, was I wanted to get him into the TV station, and I wanted to get all the stories on camera, because I used to do talk show, and old timers would come in and they'd tell you all the coolest stories about history and things you
Yeah.
didn't hear about anywhere else, and it was totally fun. then when he was gone and we lost whatever stories we had, I just decided, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and get people. But that's really neat that you started to just go ahead and fix all of these gravestones, which I'm sure there's probably a lot you're able to learn about with these people when you piece them back together.
Yeah, I'm definitely not an historian, and I think that I'm more of a art, I'm a conservator, but it actually wasn't that easy to get started. It took a lot of fighting for these places because there was an attitude when I started that was like, these places are spooky. Why would you want to do that? There's a reason they're like this. It's dangerous. They're full of syringes. The homeless people live in the back. And it was like, okay, well, first of all, those are just people. And these are beautiful places. And so it took a lot of my career just, convincing people that what I was doing wasn't crazy. It was, worth it. And it's always interesting because when we repair gravestones, there's always people who are like, that's my ancestor. And sometimes when we used to uncover contemporary gravestones that were in places that were abandoned, people would come forward and it was very, very important to them. But I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure that's why I got into it. I think I got into it because of broken window theory, that having places in your neighborhood that are decrepit and falling apart, increases crime in your neighborhood. I got into it because, these places are free. There have been times in my life as a young person living in a housing project when I was a kid where I had never gone to a museum or anything like that because we didn't have museum money. But there's no such thing as needing to pay admission to an old burying ground. These are public places, and they're places where you can sort of wander around and enjoy nature and see the artwork. And so I felt very strongly about them as a landscape, a place that belongs to the people where the place is located. And the history of who's buried there was a little secondary. Like, I love hearing about it, but when I go into a site and I see things that are broken, I don't always have the time to research whose gravestone it is. I just start fixing them. And then I post about them and I let other people tell me whose grave I just fixed.
That's really unique. Very, very unique, though. That for those reasons primarily. So as an artist, what stands out to you the most about these older graves and markers?
Yeah, I mean, they're of the earliest artwork we have in this country that still exists. And it's amazing that they're outside and have withstood, centuries of weather. And some have, done better than others because of the material they're made of. But the idea that there are objects and they're applied art. So it's not like expressive art. In most cases, somebody came up with a motif and they stuck with that motif their entire career or some variation of that motif. So, I'm not sure it was really a means of self-expression back then, or really even a means of expressing who the deceased was, except for maybe through the inscription. But it was, at some point, somebody had to come up with their motif and they just stuck with it. And so it amazes me that you have these 300-year-old objects in some cases, that you can look at and sort of see the artist's hand in them. And especially as somebody who has to excavate them, I see a lot of hidden stuff underneath the ground that that they chiseled while practicing. It's like you can really see the artist in these stones, and you can see how their imagery was kind of passed on through different carvers and how those different generations of carvers made it their own. I just think, what other opportunity do we have to really be that up close with art,
Outlook on that. I'm always hearing about like what the meaning of the marker says, or why there's only this information put down, or this was written down at request of, whoever was burying the person. And that
Yeah.
is interesting to be able to look at that and go, yeah, this is a 300-year-old art piece.
Yeah,
And
and all that symbolism that you're talking about, yeah, of course I care about that, but it's very secondary to me because in our area, our cemeteries and burying grounds were in such bad condition that it was a historic preservation emergency. Like things were getting hit by mowers and trees, and there was a total lack of people doing what I do in this area. So it was like being barraged by something I knew needed to change. And I have never, even to this point, I've been doing this for a decade. I've never really had time to sit down and be like, well, this is this person's story. This is the symbolism. That is, to me, is all very, very secondary to just saving the object. So it's there so that other people can take their expertise and put it onto what I do. I'm very specialized in what I do, and I want to give that to people who love doing that, but it's not something that I have immediate interest in. It's let's save them and you guys can sort it out afterwards. But, these places need more help than is available. And if I stop and I pause to get off track, then that's one less gravestone that gets repaired.
yeah, yeah, that's important. So that way the historians can afterwards go ahead and study it, if it's still there. So how'd you get the ball rolling? You decided you wanted to preserve it. It was important. It's free to go in. Many of these need some care and repair.
Yeah, the place where I actually started was First Parish Burial Ground in Gloucester. And I know that we discussed previously that I don't read books, but I did write a book, which I hear is ill-advised. You should read books to write books, but that's not how I live my life. So I wrote a book kind of like NaNoWriMo style, where you write a novel in a month. And it was at the very end of it, I was like, I'm feeling kind of uninspired. I'm going to Google the location where the last chapter is set. So I Googled historic burying ground in Gloucester. And it led me to that site, and it was so overgrown that the weeds were actually up to our shoulders. And I had to wade in to the burying ground, and it was just so intensely horrible that I went home and you may be a little too young to remember this, but there used to be this thing called Craigslist personals where
Oh yeah.
it wasn't just for dating, it was for making friends. And I had made this new friend, Crystal, on the Craigslist personals, because I don't get out much. and so we had really just met once, and I called her up and I was like, who wants an adventure? And she was like, yes, I want an adventure. So I talked to Josh and I was like, hey, Josh, do we have I know we don't have a weed whacker. We didn't have a penny to our names, but what can we do? Can we get one of those grass whips and just grass whip a path so people can just even get into the place and get to to the gravestones? And, and before I knew it, I had quit my job and started doing this full time to save this one place. And I was there for 2 years spearheading this project with a lot of volunteers, just going there whenever I could, cutting things back, trying to expose and reveal gravestones that have been missing. There was a whole cemetery behind this old burying ground. The burying ground dated to 1644. There was a whole Victorian cemetery behind it that we had to be shown existed on a map because it was so overgrown. It just looked like a wall of weeds, vines hanging from trees. And so it took a lot of fighting, a lot of, I'm sorry, but you have to start doing your job. I was unpopular for a while with certain people, but I really believed in it, and it's so much different now than it was then, and
Yeah.
I guess
So
these sort of long-winded answers.
yeah, yeah. No, so more people now are definitely on board then with supporting the epic, not epoch preservation.
Night and day. Like we have actual fans who show up on site. You know, it completely night and day. Like when we started, it was like Sisyphus and his boulder, you know? And now people call us and ask us to save their burying places and their gravestones. So yeah, it's couldn't be more different than 10 years ago. And I think people, because of our outreach and just how much we love these places, it's been sort of contagious, and people are starting to, or have come around to the idea that we need to protect, our burying places because they're just so cool,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, and it's history you can literally walk around and touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, are there? This might sound like the dumbest question. Um, is like with the different centuries, the different eras in the cemeteries, um, the way that people buried. Like I know since you just mentioned the Victorian era, I know that in the Victorian era, like burial in death was like the most incredible part of life. Like Victorian funerals were like a whole town gathering. It's just like dozens or hundreds of people would get together and have this massive celebration while they buried someone. Um,
Yep.
is uh, versus like the 1700s where like people would just get tossed right into the ground, be like, all right, you're done, last rites, and move on. um are there some that you found to be buried um in a better or worse condition, or things that vary between the different markers?
I mean, there are different social classes, right? The clergy is number one. They always have the nicest gravestones, right? Like there was no separation of church and state for quite a long time, and you can definitely tell that the clergy had more money to throw around at the carvers. The 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 gravestones of a lot of the clergy, not all of them, but the ones that are carved by the parks have like these elaborate portraits, and like they're just so detailed and so much wording. So there were different social classes more than, of course, like our attitudes toward death changed a lot century to century. And there were people who never made it into burying grounds at all, right? Like the African American or the enslaved community. And,
Or they just got dumped in a hole in the ground, no marker?
I think because like these or used for medical experiments, you know, but I think like the differences in the carvers all sort of carved the same thing. And the differences were really more whether or not you had a gravestone to begin with. You either got a gravestone or you didn't get a gravestone. And our earliest gravestones were field markers that you would sort of deposit at the head and the foot, no carving on them. And that's probably how most of the witch trial victims that were spirited away and buried by their family were buried with, field stones rather than gravestones. But yeah, I think even back then, it wasn't like I'm sort of formulating an opinion as I talk. I do that a lot. But even back then, like even Quakers, it was common to not have any gravestones at all if you were a Quaker because of their own beliefs.
I mean, that's really interesting that the Quakers never had any burials. I mean,
They
as
did. They did. There were Quaker burying grounds with gravestones. Their gravestones are much different, though. They're plainer, and a lot of them before a certain time don't say the month on them because they believed that the months were named after false gods. So it would say like 7th month of. So, there's almost two camps of Quakers, and back then, it actually caused a lot of division in the Quaker meeting about people who believed that you should have gravestones and then people who believed that you should not have gravestones. Like it was a real point of contention, especially in Salem, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Didn't know that. Now I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. So was there anything for like? Would they just bury somebody in the ground, or did they have a system or a marked off area as to where they would bury people without the stones?
Well, there's supposed to be a Quaker burying ground up in Amesbury, which was a real hub of Quakerism that doesn't have any gravestones, and they're just sort of in a field. But there's another cemetery that kind of abuts it, you know. So I'm not sure if they ever kept records about, like a map, but especially in the congregations that didn't believe in the gravestones. But, there's always this, like, do you know who Thomas Mall? You
But
have to be like into Quakerism to really, but there's some debate. He was a very, very important early Quaker in Salem. And there's some debate about where he was buried, whether or not he ever had a gravestone or, because there was a Quaker burying ground in what is today Peabody, but was Salem, that all the burials were moved to different places. So some of the first burials that are at the Quaker Cemetery in Salem were actually moved and have like these very old fieldstone markers. So there's a lot of debate over where his burial may have been moved or if it was moved, because he was just worldwide real figurehead for Quakerism in early America. We were at John Greenleaf Whittier's house in Amesbury, and did you know that he has holes in all of his doors
really,
because he had a parrot that would
okay.
he would allow to fly through this hole in the doors. And then it was like, I think those parrots are now called Quaker parrots. So we always make this like joke where we're imagining John Greenleaf Whittier saying, "Polly want a Quaker?"
Probably want a Quaker. Awesome. I love that.
I mean, he's the one who had a parrot. It's a religious tradition that's really important to me. It's always been in my family, but you have to have. I bet he had a good sense of humor too.
I'm pretty sure he did. If he had a parrot and he put holes in all of his doors for his parrot to fly through, I have a feeling that guy probably screwed with a lot of people with that parrot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very unique. So, I mean, do you guys do funding, donations? Have you grown this project of yours?
Yeah, so we're a business. So we're hired by municipalities. We are funded by grants. And so no donations. I mean, unless I have like a special pro bono project that I take on that I'm not, it's not funded in any other way. Sometimes I'll, before I would do like a GoFundMe to save something that I just needed to cover the materials for. But apart from that, no, we're funded completely by grants and cemetery budgets and all that. So,
Wonderful.
but that's not to say that's true all over the country. We're very lucky to be in Massachusetts where there are historic preservation grants that aren't really difficult to get, but the rest of the country isn't like that. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of other people who do take donations.
So you said that there are people that are volunteers that are fans of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we used to teach workshops where, I would have like 10 people come out and, learn how to clean gravestones or do simple resets. And that was a lot of fun. We have quite the community of people who now have gone on to their own projects and are doing great things. As far as people who are fans, I think that's part of doing what we do around Salem. Like there are people in Salem are very devoted and very expressive in their in their fandom about really a lot of different things. And so we kind of lucked out being in the Salem area that people tend to be pretty devoted to our work and aren't afraid to express it, because there are days where it's just a real trudge. You know, I was telling you that I feel a little broken today. I was going into the field and I'm like, I'm going to reset 4 gravestones, but I ended up resetting 10 gravestones. And days like today, I love hearing somebody tell me that I'm doing God's work, or like that I'm a hero. I need that. Like, people are like, I don't like attention. Please give me attention. Like, I'm broken sometimes. Like, there are times where I'm like, oh man, my 46-year-old body can't take any more of this. And I need somebody to be like, Rachel, you're unique. You haven't figured out. Like, I'm not too good for it.
Yeah. No, I understand. I understand. Yeah, needing that boost. So, are there ways people can volunteer and help you out?
Yeah, we tend to allow people on our work site, but it's more for them than for us. It's more, if somebody lives somewhere where there isn't a lot of education in this field, but they have a lot of, burying places that are in need, we're happy to teach people some basic skills to get them started, and we kind of do that because we're so busy, not so much by teaching workshops anymore, but just sort of allowing people to hang out a little bit, and ask questions and pick things up. So
Cool. And they can get in touch with you through the website?
yeah, I can be contacted through email, or I pay probably more attention to Instagram and Facebook than anything else. But yeah, we're very friendly and easygoing. We try to say yes to people.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, I mean, you said yes to this, so.
I mean, it's your hat. How can I say no to a guy in that hat?
That's how I lure everybody in. If it's not the hat, it's the outfit.
That's right. You're sharp.
That's how I sucker people in. Then they don't realize when it's too late. Oh, I'm gonna get asked too many questions.
Nah, you're great. You know what the challenge is when you do a lot of interviews like we do? It's always a challenge to give different answers to people so that it's entertaining for people who follow us. And so if I ever get off track when people ask questions, it's because I know I've answered it in this specific way 20 times before, and I want to give you new information and entertain people who may have read or listened to other interviews.
Yeah, I get that. It's always fun whenever I can get a little sidetracked from someone and they can give all some extra information.
Yeah. I've never talked about John Greenleaf Whittier's parrot before.
Awesome. Get to talk about that. That's the first frame. Yeah. So, do you have favorite projects you've worked on, favorite stones you found?
I have projects that have probably been more highly publicized than others. Mm-hmm. Like the African American section at Howard Street, or the Rebecca Nurse Homestead Cemetery project. Those were definitely things that were very well publicized, in part because they happened during the height of the pandemic and people were looking for other things to get their minds on than the bad news that was going on around them. So those projects are fun in the sense that I got to connect with a lot of people. I did a lot of live videos so that, I like people. But as far as like a favorite project, probably just the projects that I put the most work into. Like Josh and I have been working at Old North in Ipswich for 7 years, and we've repaired, I don't know, it has to be close to 400 gravestones now at Old North. And so just as far as the amount of energy that we put into something. Probably Old North and Ipswich. It's so close to where we live. That's definitely a favorite. And then we're going to be down in Wayland for the next 2 years. We have a contract to do 1,500 gravestones down in Wayland. So I am assuming that by the end of Wayland, that's going to be one of our favorites because that's a lot of work.
Yeah, very cool. So what's the oldest gravestone you've worked on?
I gave a little cleaning to the oldest gravestone in Massachusetts last week because I was showing it to somebody. It's in Ipswich. It dates to 1647. It's called the EL stone. It's probably for a member of the Lakeman family. And people always want to see it when they come to Old North. So I showed someone it, but it was starting to overgrow with lichens. So I gave that a light cleaning, but not anything major. A lot of the earliest gravestones we work with are, late 1600s to early 1700s.
Very unique. Okay. Well, Rachel, I do want to say thank you. Kudos for you for doing this project. And thank you for working to help not just preserve American history, but American art as well. Is there anything you would like to say before you go?
No, but thank you for thinking to contact me. And I'm always, I always try to say yes to people because I didn't get into this to not talk about it. I want people to come along for the adventure, and I'm so happy that so many people do. And maybe hopefully you'll start following our social media too, Garrett.
I sure will.
Okay. This was an hour-long plea for you to follow me on Instagram.
All right. Well, now you have me following you.
Okay.